the original novel is by J.R.R. Tolkien. Note that, unlike other books, The Hobbit has already been made into several movies in its lifetime. But despite that, I plan to pitch the story as best I can. The Hobbit is an inspirational film about the journey and evolution of Bilbo Baggins, a homebody hobbit with priorities set on cozy living and zero conflict. Bilbo, being a Baggins, is very respected in his community, mainly for his wealth and normal and adventurous lifestyle. All this changes when the wizard Gandalf knocks on Bilbo's door and starts for him a journey the likes of which he had only dreamt of having. After giving Bilbo some cryptic information about adventuring, Gandalf walks off, but only the next afternoon Bilbo is greeted and flustered by the appearance of 13 burly and boisterous dwarves, led by Thorin. These inform him of the aforementioned journey and tell him why exactly they are taking it: to liberate their stolen riches from the clutches of Smaug, the foul dragon under the mountain Erebor. They also show a map of the mountain and a mysterious key. Bilbo, after some convincing and coercing by the way of promise of treasure, agrees to be their burglar and gives in to his small but steadily insistent urge to break the veil of mediocrity hovering over his life. After a night of sleep and a late awakening, Bilbo and the party, 15 in total, set off on their journey. Their first enemy encounter is close at hand, trolls having captured the dwarves, and with a lot of luck and a wizard named Gandalf, they overcome and outsmart the trolls. Their next challenge, though, is more difficult. After staying with a friend of Gandalf's, the elf called Elrond, and deciphering the moon letters on their map to reveal a secret entrance into the mountain, the group settles to sleep in a cave and shelter from the storm outside. However, while they sleep, sinister goblins open a crack in the wall of the cave and steal away the ponies, and after that, the dwarves themselves and Bilbo are taken into the terrifying depths of the goblins' caverns. The dwarves, with the help of Gandalf, escape, but Bilbo is left behind accidentally and runs into the creature Gollum. This is where, through tense contest of riddles, Bilbo makes his way out of the underground and meets up with his fellow dwarven people. But not without a prize, a magical ring that can turn its wearer invisible. A new danger, the wild wargs, wolves of the land, drive the party into the path of the great eagles and their lord. These rescue the group from the terrifying canines and take them close to a friend of Gandalf's who he has business with and visits. They meet this friend, Bjorn, a man who can shift into a bear, and Gandalf tells him of their adventures so far, and in payment for the story, Bjorn provides them with a delicious supper, well deserved after their trials. They sleep in his great house, and in the morning he gives them ponies and supplies for their journey further. He and Gandalf bid the dwarves and the hobbit farewell as they reach the edge of Mirkwood, the expansive forest, and began to navigate its dark depths. They trek for days, the darkness and bareness of the forest and rationing of food gradually wearing down their spirits. Finally, their stores of food are all but depleted, and the ominous laughter they hear in the woods around them and the desperateness of the situation drive them to intense gloom and despair. On chance, they stumble into the elves of the wood, dancing and feasting, and in great panic on meeting these elves, Bilbo gets separated from his friends and runs into a giant spider, menacing and intent on eating him, but kills it with his blade, and afterward christens the same blade's sting. He discovers the dwarves have run into a similarly precarious situation, strung up by more spiders. With his cunning and wit, Bilbo is able to outthink the spiders and free his friends. Newly liberated, but still hungry and exhausted, they stop to sleep at a wood elf camp, but soon after they realize that Thorin has disappeared. Meanwhile, we see Thorin imprisoned by the wood elves under the assumption that he was stealing their treasure. He is not treated badly, but the Wood Elf King intends to keep him until he admits to stealing. The dwarves and Bilbo, on the brink of death from starvation and thirst, try to get out of the forest, but fail, and are captured by the elves, except for one small determined hobbit who had used his magic ring to escape elvish detection. Bilbo followed the elf procession right into their cave stronghold, but had to abandon the prisoners to hide. And hide he did for a long while, almost 2 weeks, stealing food off elf tables to sustain himself. While in hiding, though, he collected information about the elves and their fortress, especially their trading. Bilbo discovers a docking station where the elves accept barrels of wine and other goods, directly above a flowing stream and water gate that lead to the long lake where a town of humans live. When at last the soldiers and staff are asleep from the potent wine they drank, Bilbo sprung the dwarves from their captors' cages, and in stealth had each packed in a barrel the right size for them. He finishes packing them just in time. The butler is responsible for pushing the barrels into the stream, come and start shoving off the barreled dwarves. Soon the last barrel is being pushed, and in a panic, Bilbo jumps onto the barrel and goes over the edge with it, out past the water gate. And so the party had escaped the elves. After a time careening down the waters, Bilbo still clinging to his barrel and horribly cold and hungry, the river empties out into the long lake. Bilbo, quick to react, pushes the barrels to shore and frees the suffering dwarves. They proceed into Lake Town, or Esgaroth, and find the master of the town. Thorin informs him of his lineage and the right to the treasure guarded by Smaug, and the master gives the party lodging and food, practically pampering them. In a week, they were all recovered and set back on their quest. Being bid farewell by the master, they came to the mountain by river rafting. The sinister plumes of smoke issuing from the front gate of the mountain Erebor are unsettling, as are the barrenness and lack of life in the deserted wastes around the mountain. They investigate the secret door the map had shown them before, but it is locked, with no apparent way to open it. They almost lose hope, but as the new moon is coming up and the sun going down, a keyhole appears in the rock, and the dwarves use the key that came with the map to open the secret door. They announce that their burglar, Bilbo, should investigate the yawning tunnel that the door leads into. Balin, one of the dwarves, also goes with Bilbo, but stops a bit down the tunnel to be a lookout. Bilbo finally finds the long-hated villain, Smaug, the Red Dragon, sleeping on the dwarven treasure, content as a purring cat. The hobbit stole a single golden cup as evidence and walked back through the tunnel to the dwarves. But the dragon awoke, sensing a small draught in his cave. He then sees that the cup, a part of his esteemed and coveted hoard, is missing. He roars in rage and races out the front door. The dwarves panic, but Bilbo tells them to hide in the tunnel behind the secret door. They hoist their equipment into the tunnel and hide, while the dragon's rage burns as fire across the mountainside. The day passes and the dwarves hide while the dragon takes out his anger and tires himself. Bilbo agrees to scout for the dragon's weak spot while Smaug naps, wearing his ring and thus invisible. And so, off he goes down the tunnel and finds Smaug again, asleep once more. But, unknown to Bilbo, Smaug is only feigning sleep, and indeed confronts the hobbit, though not being able to see him. But Bilbo talks wisely to the dragon, and convinces him to roll over and boast his strength and wealth. Doing so, Smaug unwittingly reveals his weak spot, a hollow on his chest, bare of jewel or tough scale. He ends the conversation quickly, and escapes back through the tunnel, but not without a bit of singed back. He tells the dwarves of the weak spot and the dragon's words. In his fear and desperation, Bilbo demands that the group shut the secret door. The dwarves do so, now shut in the mountain, but for good reason. At that moment, the dragon descends and starts pounding the mountainside, crushing rocks and smashing the stones with his tail. Then, he flies towards the running river in the long lake. The dwarves and the hobbit investigate the tunnel's end, calling out to see if Smaug is still in the cavern. And finally, Bilbo goes down into the hall, and not finding the dragon, instead finds the Arkenstone, pride of the dwarves, and especially Thorin, and secrets it away. He summons the other dwarves, the dragon having gone, and they reminisce over the dwarf-forged treasures and present the hobbit with a mithril mail shirt. Thorin guides the dwarves through the old dwarf palace, finding an opening out onto the running river. They look down over the valley, the river foaming as it burbles down the cold stone. They start the trek to an old lookout post, and once arrived, they find a small room and set up camp, not knowing anything of the dragon's whereabouts. But the dragon was, indeed, still about, and was on direct course to the long lake and its town, Esgaroth. The people of the town, seeing gold on the horizon, think it is the wealth of the dwarves descending down the river, but a sensible man named Bard demands that they cut the bridges and go to arms, for it is not the gold of dwarf-forged riches, but the red gold scales of the dragon Smaug. Smaug begins to attack, savagely and with no mercy. The townsfolk fight back but have no hope against the dragon. However, Bard, seeing the dragon in the moonlight, finds Smaug's weak spot and uses his luckiest, strongest arrow, piercing the dragon. He falls on the town, and that is the end of both the town and Smaug, the worm. Bard takes charge in the wake of the fled master and helps the people of Esgaroth. The birds of the land take word to the wood elves that Smaug lay dead, and the word reached Bjorn also in his vast house. The elves came in only 5 days to Esgaroth to help the people and view the body that was Smaug. And now we return to the dwarves and their hobbit burglar. Having watched for the dragon all night and not seeing any sign of them, they are uneasy when they see clouds of birds gathering. They encounter a black thrush that they had seen often before in their camp in the wastes, and after the dwarven company speaks about ravens and their friendship with dwarves in front of the bird, the thrush flies off. It returns, however, with an old decrepit raven named Roak, who tells Thorin of the death of the worm Smaug. He also tells the desire of the elves and the lake men to get a share in the treasure, as they believe it is due to them. Thorin, full of rage, declares that they will take their stand in the mountain, and to go quickly, for time is short. He also requests that Roak contact his cousin Dane in the Iron Hills, for he has dwarves well armed and ready. With the ravens updating them, they fortify the main entrance and make a new path, and retrieve their remaining ponies, working for a day. Lights in the distance signal the coming of the crowds, and the dwarves wait and watch. By the morning, they see a company approach, armed and ready for war. Thorin asks why they are there, but they stay silent, facing the stone wall erected by the dwarves. They move camp to the mountain, and Bilbo, hearing the songs and merriment, longs to join their group. The next morning, another company comes to the mountain, and Thorin hails them and asks who they are. A man, Bard, comes and says it is he and that they come seeking parley, for much of Smaug's hoard was from the halls of Dale, the town near the mountain that was burned when Smaug came, where Bard's ancestor Girion led, and therefore some was rightfully his and Esgaroth's, since Smaug had also destroyed Esgaroth in his siege. These words were true, but Thorin was powerfully swayed by the gold, and tells Bard that men will take none of his riches, declares that no parley will be had, and tells the company to leave, else the arrows of the dwarves fly. He also says that if they wish to talk with him again, they must leave their elves. Bard retorts that the elves are their friends, and have helped the people of Esgaroth in their time of need. He says that they will give the dwarves time to change their minds, or they will return and wage war. With that, Thorin strikes an arrow into the shield of Bard, and Bard speaks that the mountain will be sieged. With that, the messengers leave, Bilbo disapproving greatly of Thorin's behavior. The days pass, and Thorin bades his company to look for the Arkenstone, unknowing of its location with Bilbo. The raven, Roak, tells Thorin the armies of Dane are coming, and that perhaps the dwarves should still truce with men and elves. Bilbo, his mind made up, flees in the night with his ring, and comes to the companies of Bard and the Elven King. He reveals himself to them and tells them he is also in opposition to Thorin's opinions, and that he can leverage the dwarves with the Arkenstone as bargaining material. He gives them that same gem, much to their astonishment. In starting to go back to the dwarves, Bilbo meets Gandalf, and the wizard greets him and says he will tell all in time. With that, Bilbo returns to the dwarven camp, successful in his treating with that of the enemy. The next day, Bard comes to the front gate again and asks if Thorin has changed his mind. Thorin, of course, says he is not. Bard presents the Arkenstone, and Thorin is awestruck. He demands to know how they got it, and Bilbo admits he gave the stone to them. He shakes the Hobbit, and declares that he wishes Gandalf was there. Gandalf, always the dramatic presence, reveals himself. Thorin yells that they are all in league, and Bilbo swings down the wall and joins the dwarves' enemies. Bard gives the dwarves until the next day to change their minds. The day passes, and Dane with his armies arrives. Bard goes to meet them, as does Bilbo, and the army of dwarves demands they be let past. Bard refuses, and they begin a fight, but Gandalf interrupts them and announces that the goblins of the mountain have come with the wild wolves and wargs. And so the battle began, a great battle known as the Battle of the Five Armies. The marching goblins strike sense into the opposing peoples, and they unite to fight their common opponent. The battle was more terrible than anything Bilbo had ever gone through. The dwarves, men, and elves fight with all their strength and bravery, and beat down the enemy. But the goblins are strong, and drive the armies back till they are almost victorious. But on the horizon, shouted out by Bilbo, the eagles arrive. After this, Bilbo is struck with a stone and rendered unconscious. He awakes on his own and sees that the armies after all were victorious, but not without great bloody costs. He comes upon Thorin in his tent, dying. They make up and forgive each other for their disagreements, and Thorin dies. After this, the treasure is divided among the people, and Bilbo leaves the mountain with the Elven King and Gandalf. They eventually even left the Elven King, and journeyed back to Bag End through bitter winter and a hopeful spring. At the beginning of May, Gandalf and Bilbo return to the house of Elrond and rest. They finally return to Bilbo's home of Bag End, only to find that Bilbo's belongings are being auctioned off, he being thought dead by the neighborhood. He fixes this, although it takes a while, and returns to his own home, though he has changed from the hobbit he once was. Several years later, Gandalf comes to visit with the dwarf Balin, and they reminisce. Balin tells of the old master of Esgaroth and the new one. Bilbo remarks that the old songs came true about the rivers flowing with gold after all. Gandalf says he is surprised that Mr. Baggins disbelieved the prophecies only since he was a part of them, and that he's only a very small person in a large world. Bilbo remarks that he's very glad of that indeed, and the movie ends with a small hobbit handing a tall wizard a tobacco jar.